is a little separate, but we realize it's important, so we're going to do a separate section on that. Just they have a little different care, a little different requirements, but we know people want to see that. But anyhow, to begin, if you're either growing a fruit tree now or thinking of planting one, and they need at least, there's a first typo, at least 6 hours per day of sunlight, most all of them. Some will do a little better, do okay with a little less, but certainly you want to try for that. And less will result in, less growth and kind of poor structure generally and less fruit. So you want to try for 6 hours a day, more if you can. Um, and if you have an existing fruit tree that's becoming shaded by other trees and you're noticing less production, that could be part of the problem. The other consideration, we can't really do much about this, is you need a reasonable amount of soil depth. Normally, you're going to get that here. I mean, we have deep valley soils. But the problem that could come up is with our soils that tend to have relatively high clay. The clay is going to settle and can form what's called a hard pan at just a couple of feet deep. And if you're on former ag land that was driven over by tractors, that's going to make it even, why is it doing that? Make it even worse. I'm not doing anything here. I don't know why it's doing that. I don't know if you're seeing that it's yes, doing that. Try another slide. Anyhow, if you're probably going to be okay to plant a new fruit tree, but the roots are not, I'm not touching anything here. You're right. I seem to be having more than just a few technical difficulties.
AI.
Yeah. All right, maybe we ought to switch. Bonnie, you want to, I'll try to get out of here and put yours up. Bonnie?
Yes. Do you want to try to meet? I'll share my slides and see if you can talk on those slides.
Yeah, I probably
Okay.
can.
And hopefully you stay up there. So let me do
I
that.
mean, I've got kind of, well, I'm back.
Oh, okay.
Well, let's go and see if that happens again. No, see, did yours did it
Yeah.
expand? Yeah,
Yeah.
I
All right.
have,
Let's just try this and see if that'll
yeah,
work.
although I've got to figure out how to, yes, okay.
Okay. Can you
Yes.
Stop
see that?
share.
Yes.
And does that work
Okay.
for everyone else's screens? I can make it full
It's
screen.
it's good.
Okay, I'll just leave it.
Okay, so go down a couple of slides, Bonnie.
Okay, yeah. Oops. Here?
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
So anyhow, soil depth. It's probably a good idea to dig down a couple of feet if you can. See if you hit any hard pan. If you did, then you would try to break through that, which can be quite a task, but certainly will pay great dividends. If fruit trees are only going to go down about 3 feet, their roots, but they're definitely going to do better if you can go down deeper, go down at least that deep. Um, and you want them to drain well. So all the reason to check and make sure you've got enough soil depth. The other consideration, and this is getting to be more and more of a consideration with climate change, is fruit trees, generally speaking, need a certain amount of what they call winter chill. So those are temperatures below 45 and between November 1st and February 28th. So that's when they're dormant, but they need that cold in order to generally develop new buds. It just affects lots of aspects of the tree. So you can get poor pollinated. Well, this you can get a prolonged bloom, but also you can get less fruit set. Buds won't mature, so it raises a number of problems, and that's going to be uh, different species and different varieties of the same species are going to need different chill hours. So next, Bonnie. Okay, so those that typically need a higher number of chill hours, and you can see the numbers there. Apples and pears and cherries are the classic ones that need that. And some new varieties are being developed that need fewer chill hours, but you'd need to pay attention to that if you want to grow those. For the moderate chill hours, you can see apricots, plums, peaches, and nectarines, some pears. That's pretty much in our ballpark. You can probably get that here and probably will for a number of years. Who knows how long? And then for the low chill hours, again, some apples are being developed, but almonds and figs and persimmons and pomegranates need lower chill hours. So those are certainly the safest. Um, next. So here's what we had in Davis. You can see how much it varies, by quite a bit. But last year we only had 800 chill hours. The year before we had 1,500. So, you can pretty well hope to get somewhere close to 1,000. But any variety, any tree that needs more than that is going to be problematic. And you just aren't going to get the kind of growth and again pollination and fruit production that you would with a tree that needs fewer chill hours. So if you're looking for trees, definitely ask about that. And if you're going to a good nursery, they should be able to answer that question, how many chill hours the tree needs. Um, a couple of other, weather temperature considerations. Spring frost can be a problem, not a lot lately, but I suppose could be still. We lived in the foothills we had property for 12 years. And there, spring frosts were a big issue. The apricots would bloom and it would freeze, and the apricot blossoms were all gone. So it's something to think about. I don't think it's a big issue here. Most all of what people want to grow are probably not going to be affected by spring frosts, except for on the very odd year. Summer heat is another thing that is probably more of a factor. You can see that almonds, peaches, nectarines, and some plums like heat. Um, I would add pomegranates clearly to that. And persimmons don't seem to be affected by hot summers. Apricots more so, and I think you're seeing apricots that were grown in areas of the valley just aren't doing as well anymore. And apricots are kind of a tough one in general for a lot of reasons. Apples like cooler weather. That's why you tend to find apples grown in areas either in the foothills around here or Washington, areas that have cooler summers. And berries we aren't really going to talk about, but throw that in. Most berries want cooler summers than we're getting these days. So it is what it is. Some of the other weather caused problems that you want to think about is that spring rains can create a challenge. Clearly, pollination issues can be caused because honeybees don't fly in the rain. Some of the stone fruits and diseases like peach leaf curl and uh, brown rot um, are um, are um, promoted, if you will, by spring rains, a cool, long, rainy spring, and so is fire blight, which affects mostly pears and peaches. So Bonnie's going to talk about this next week, but it's just something to consider when you're picking a variety, if you will. You might want to ask about, if it's a peach tree, there are some peach varieties now that are less susceptible to peach leaf curl. There are some apple varieties and pear varieties that are less susceptible to fire blight. And so if that kind of thing is a concern, and we are going to have some cool, wet springs, you want to, try to pick a variety that may be less susceptible. And if you want to roll the dice, you can roll the dice, and that's fine too. But just know what some of the issues are. Okay, you can put questions in chat. If that's probably the easiest thing. I didn't mention that. Um, and or you could just jump in verbally right now for if you have any questions. No questions,
No.
Pauline? Or okay. So the other thing, and again, this is something you need to think about when choosing a fruit tree, or if you have a current fruit tree, um, let's say it's a tree that needs cross-pollination, such as a Bing cherry. I think Bings are one of those. So that means you need a tree of the same species, but of a different variety to pollinate your tree, your fruit. And that's going to affect the amount of fruit. Some trees will produce a small amount of fruit or a smaller amount of fruit if they're not cross-pollinated, but some will produce virtually none. And so if your neighbor had the cherry tree that was, cross-pollinating yours and it was cut down, all of a sudden, that year you're going to go, where did all my cherries go? And I've had that come up a number of times. So it's something to think about. If you want to control that variable, then for trees that need cross-pollination, you're going to need to plant two. You're going to need, so that's something to ask about when you're selecting a fruit tree, or again, it could be something to think about if all of a sudden, a formerly productive tree stops. So just, something to think about. Well, you need to plant two, or there's some that are already grafted to have two varieties or even three varieties on them. Or you can graft, and you can graft one of those pollinator varieties onto your existing tree, and that will pretty much solve the problem. Okay. So again, if you're going out if you're going to buy a fruit tree, virtually everything you buy now at a nursery has been grafted. And if you look, you can see that crook in the picture to the right. That's where a bud was grafted onto what's called a rootstock, which is the roots, and then the top part is called the scion variety. So the root stock would have certain characteristics. It may be resistant to disease. It may be a semi-dwarfing or dwarfing rootstock. That means it'll keep the tree smaller. But probably that tree wouldn't have had fruit that we would have appreciated very much. But the top variety, the Scion, is the one that has the fruit that has been that we're going to want to eat. It's going to be sweeter, bigger, or prettier, or something that is desirable. So note that when you're looking for trees, again, there's some rootstocks that do better in our soil than others. And again, if you go to a good nursery, they will be able to advise you, and probably only would carry trees on rootstocks that are going to do well in the soil in our area. And the other thing is that, believe it or not, some rootstocks, and I actually don't even know how this works, but some rootstocks are more resistant to some diseases and to insects. So here, the M111 rootstock, which is an apple rootstock, is a fairly common apple rootstock, is for some reason resistant to woolly apple aphids. So that's another thing to think about. And certainly there are some rootstocks that are more resistant to diseases. Um, So there's, again, there are a number of rootstocks that will do well in our area, but it's something to ask about if you're buying a tree. Okay, Bonnie. And again, why do we have various rootstocks? Um, some are resistant to disease, some control the size of the tree, either bigger or smaller. Some are more adaptable to certain soils in the area. So, and some can encourage earlier fruit production, which is another thing to think about when you're buying trees, especially if you're buying more than one. You don't want them both to come be ripe at the same time if you can help it. And so you may like a variety. It could be that the rootstock you put it on is going to affect how early that tree is going to the fruit is going to ripen. So again, just another thing to think about and to ask about when you're selecting a tree. Because in the scheme of things, they're not that expensive. They can be, but 30 or 40 bucks. But what you're really doing is investing a tremendous amount of time in a tree. And you want to pick one that you're going to like and it's going to be, healthy and produce fruit for you for a good number of years. Um, so it's well worth spending a little time to make that selection. Um, Again, there are a number of different rootstocks. We don't need to go into them in depth. Um, and as you probably noted, this is being recorded as with all the others. So if you want to go back and look at these slides more carefully, that's an easy way to do it. It's on the Yellow Master Gardener website. Um, Again, yes, the rootstocks are different rootstocks are adaptable to various soil conditions. Um, and then what are the best varieties of fruit? Um, so there are a lot of factors here. You can fruit trees. What are some of the best varieties? You can try to size is certainly a factor. And there are fruit trees now just coming out that are true dwarfs. They were not around for very long, or not that many years ago. But now there's apples and at least peaches that are either dwarfed by either being truly genetic dwarfs or they're on a super dwarfing rootstock. And those will stay fairly small, like probably in the 8 foot range. Um, if for semi-dwarfing rootstocks, um, they will actually get quite close to a full-size tree, which can be in some varieties. Take an apple tree, for instance, probably what, Bonnie, 15, 20 feet high. You don't really want a tree that high. Bonnie's going to talk about how to prune them so that you keep them down, but it's all the easier if you have a tree that is inclined to stay smaller from the beginning. So the semi-dwarf is by far the most common, and it's probably the only thing you can buy in most nurseries. Makes the most sense for small orchards, backyards, and they will grow slower generally, and they will stay somewhat smaller. So they're easier to keep small. They'll still get to be a pretty big tree if you don't prune them properly, but it'll be a lot easier to do so on a semi-dwarfing rootstock. And you can see here that figs, pomegranates, persimmons, jujubes, and grapes there's work being done to produce smaller trees, and those all can get no, not pomegranates. They stay small, but persimmons and jujubes, which I'll talk about, and figs can get to be huge trees. Fortunately, they're all very easy to to prune. So, okay, next one. Again, you can select varieties for disease resistance. So brown rot is a fungus that affects apricots to a large extent and plums. there are varieties that can at least, increase your chances of avoiding that. And again, it's not usually a big problem here unless we have a kind of a cool, wet spring. Peach leaf curl, on the other hand, is endemic for peaches and nectarines. If you grow peaches and nectarines, you are probably going to get it. Although our neighbor has a peach and a nectarine that they planted probably 4 or 5 years ago and that hasn't shown up yet. So I don't know. They're very lucky, I think. Um, but Bonnie's going to talk about, control of that. Doesn't kill the tree. Bad case will affect the could affect fruit production. I mean, it could be they drop all their fruit if they end up dropping a majority of their leaves. There are varieties that are resistant to peach leaf curl. Um, as far as I know, not all of them are great as far as flavors, so that's something to look at and do your research. But certainly, if you can avoid peach leaf curl and you're growing a peach or a nectarine, it makes your life a lot easier. Fire blight again affects primarily the pome fruits, which are apples and pears and what's the other one?
Quince.
Quince. Quince. Same family as roses, by the way. That's why they have such pretty flowers, I guess. I'm sure. Anyhow, the fire blight is also a serious problem. This can kill a tree if you don't get on top of it and prune out the fire blight. So again, if you can grow a variety that is resistant, you're ahead of the game. And then codling moth, I'm not sure how well this works, but it's apparently the earlier ripening ones can reduce codling moth. That is the worm in the apple, which we have a lot of around here too. So again, selecting varieties that kind of reduce some of the challenges of growing fruit get you ahead of the game right away. Okay. Um, we wanted to talk just a little bit now about, some of the less common fruit varieties. Everybody wants or thinks about growing, peaches and plums and apricots, and they're certainly popular, and certainly worth growing. And then there are even some of the newer hybrids. I know Bonnie's going to talk a little bit like pluots, apriums, and what is a plary, which is a plum and a cherry.
Blueberry. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are all fun. But there are also fruit varieties that are less common, that if, they're going to ripen at a different time, they're certainly going to be a different flavor. They're going to do a little bit different. Some of them are better adapted to our climate than a lot of the fruits that people try to grow, like apples. A lot of apples are not adapted to a valley climate. So the ones that we're going to talk about next, generally do well here, probably more disease resistant than a lot of the fruits that people grow, and they're just kind of fun and they're different. So next slide, Bonnie. So figs. Figs, you see them growing pretty much everywhere. I think the biggest problem with a fig tree is they produce too much and they get too big, both of which you can probably handle by, pruning them back. But they really are um, a very easy plant to grow. A lot of the varieties, you'll get two crops. You'll get a spring crop, generally smaller, and then a much bigger midsummer now or a little later crop. And so, figs are definitely something to think about. Very trouble-free, very disease-free, very easy to grow, and pretty trees. Pomegranates, these are ones that pomegranates are, you know, um, not developed for our area, but evolved in Mediterranean climate. That's what I'm trying to say. So they're well suited for our area. Pomegranates are small, which, if you have a small yard, that's a good thing. They really want to be a bush, more of a bush than a tree. But they're very well adapted to our area. And again, very few disease problems. So pomegranates, if you like them at all, certainly something to think about. Next. Avocados. At one point, I think it was awfully hard to grow avocados here, probably because varieties weren't available. Um, and or as available. And frankly, it used to get a little colder than it does now. I mean, avocados don't go dormant, and they evolved in Central and South America. But you can now grow, if you pick the right variety, um, pretty successfully, you can grow avocados here. Um, so pretty much the same kind of considerations then as other fruit trees. Pretty easy to prune. They can get big. And I can't remember whether or not avocados, they probably have them on a semi-dwarfing rootstock now, I would think. Bonnie, do you know I've never shopped for avocados?
I don't know about that. I know there are a couple varieties that are more compact, that would be a little shorter because
Yeah,
the issue is that they get really tall and then
maybe
you can't get the fruit.
genetically, yeah, the avocado trees, again, they'll get 15, 20 feet tall, 30 feet tall, probably. And we have a friend on Alameda where, the um, very mild climate, and they had this huge avocado tree in their backyard, more avocados than all the neighbors could ever eat. Um, but anyhow, so avocados are an option if you like them. Next. Guavas. These pictures actually, I think these came off. I have a strawberry guava, beautiful flowers, and attract a lot of pollinators. And they're just, they can be kept very small, easy to prune. Mine gets more shade than it should, but it's doing okay and produces guavas and is a pretty tree. So they're a tropical, semi-tropical tree, but again, um, in the last however many, 8, 9 years, 10 years, it hasn't gotten cold enough to affect mine. So they could be sensitive if we had one of those, mid 20 and below winters, but um, pretty safe these days. Um, Persimmons, this is definitely one of my favorites. Not only do I like the fruit, and the fuyu is very popular because they're the type they're firm and sweet when they're still firm. You need them like an apple essentially. Very disease resistant, not not that thirsty. Um, and they're a beautiful fruit that comes on later. It's a fall fruit, can't really grow if you don't want to grow an apple here, which again has its challenges. Persimmons are a good choice. And kind of the more traditional oblong persimmons are also still available. And if you like those, you just have to let them soften a lot more before you eat them. Um, Mulberries, definitely a dwarf variety is a good idea. They get huge. If you got a big one, you wouldn't want to, plant it where it's going to hang over a driveway and drop mulberries on your car or the driveway or whatever. But it's again, it's a very easy tree to take care of. And the dwarf and semi-dwarf varieties are certainly the ones to think about. And what happened to jujubes? They were in there. My version, did we miss them? Oh, because it was the first one and I didn't talk about it, but I want to. So jujubes are sort of like a small apple in texture. They're sweeter than most apples. Very nice flavor. There's a number of different varieties now coming out. Chico is doing probably most of the jujube research in the country, as I understand it. They have their other name is Chinese date, so they actually came from Eastern China. They're very drought tolerant. I don't know that there's a disease that can even touch them. Not that I have heard of. There might be, but at least not here. And a very productive tree, pretty glossy green foliage, and uh, and they're just very, very well adapted to our climate. Don't seem to be fussy about soils or pH. So if you're looking for something a little different, um, think about a jujube. Um, and oh, and the other thing is if you let them, they will dry right on the tree. So again, the common name for them is Chinese dates, and I know a lot of Chinese people don't pick them until they dry, but I like them fresh, like when they turn brown, like in this picture. So anyhow, just another one to try. Okay, any questions?
Yes, you have
Okay.
two.
Okay.
My fuyu has had something eating the leaves second year. Last year had heavy produce, this year five.
Um, Interesting. I don't know what would be eating the leaves. I haven't had that problem. I don't, it could be any number of things. I guess it depends on um, how big the tree is, how big a problem that would be. I mean, if they're eating all your leaves, then obviously it's an issue. Um, so, just look at the tree. I mean, something that's eating the leaves is probably big enough that you're going to see it.
Mm,
It's not, going
Not
to
yet.
be a thrip or an aphid. Um, as
Maddie, are you
far
there?
as,
I
Maddie,
am. Yes,
yeah,
I'm here. I could not see anything.
huh? Is
I've
it,
watched
yeah,
carefully.
have you watched at night?
Um, I haven't taken a flashlight out there, no,
Yeah, well,
but
that's
that's an
that.
idea.
Sure. I mean, that would be the next thing to do because I mean, it could be snails and slugs. I know they'll eat fruit, citrus tree leaves. And so I have not heard of them eating.
Well, there's no slime left behind, so I would
Yeah,
think
okay.
maybe
So
not.
maybe not that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. You can look in, you can look at the Integrated Pest Management website. It's just a good recommendation for all of this. But they well may talk about what would eat persimmon leaves.
Okay,
So, what is it? IPM.UCANR. Just Google
I'll
Integrated
Google
Pest
it. It's
Management
okay.
Davis. Yeah. As far as the production is concerned, my persimmon has a lot fewer persimmons on it this year than last. So
Okay,
I don't know if there was something overall environmentally that affected it. The other thing is if it has a really heavy crop, it could be that it'll go into alternate bearing. Now Bonnie doesn't seem to have this problem. Maybe she'll talk about it a bit. But and this is generally for fruit trees. Yeah, if so, sometimes if you have a heavy crop, it's prudent to thin it when they're still small. Like quarter size for most trees, because the tree just isn't able to produce a heavy crop in 2 years, and they're smart enough to protect themselves.
gotcha.
So that could be it. It could have been something environmental. I wouldn't worry about it. As I said, I probably have a third of the persimmons on my tree this year that I had last year. And I do thin them. I did thin it last year.
Oh,
So
wow.
that, so something else. And it's just, it's gardening. It's growing fruit trees. It's, they're just not all going to do what we want every year. But I wouldn't worry about it this year. If it became, chronic several years in a row, then yeah, you'd have to think, well, what's the issue here? But probably just the natural flow of things.
Okay.
Next question. Have you heard about mini or little Cato? We're considering putting it in a very large container.
Mini or little Cato?
CADO,
oh,
K.
cotto.
Cado.
Like a mini, like an avocado, like a
Oh,
small avocado,
oh,
a mini
no, I
cotto.
haven't. Have you, Bonnie?
I haven't heard of that one, but I know that they're coming out like all the time with these new varieties. So no, I'm not familiar with it, but it
Uh,
would be great if they came out with a very small avocado that you could put in a pot.
yeah, I
That would
mean
sell.
that would be tremendous. I mean, they're
Yeah.
beautiful trees. And if we really did get one of those cold winters, you could just move it inside. and they're very productive. So assuming this variety would be similar, you'd probably get enough avocados on a small, tree in a pot to be pretty, adequate, depending on your avocado habit.
There's one more comment. Most of my trees fruit heavily one year and slightly the following. I was told this is normal.
Well, it's normal if you don't thin, with in some varieties being worse than others. Um, but it shouldn't be normal unless that's what you want, because it is that is probably because you didn't thin in one year. And if you want a more consistent fruit production year to year, thinning is important. And you're not going to do it with cherries, okay? But with the larger fruits, apricots on up, I think generally it's a better idea to thin. Again, if you want consistent fruit production, because they will go into alternate bearing. Um, and um, it's, yeah, just preference,
One,
but that's
one,
probably it.
one last comment.
Yeah.
I had a little avocado for 3 years now in the ground, bought it at 2 feet and it's already 6 feet. No fruit yet.
I think avocados take 5 years, and don't quote me on that, but there is something about the number of years an avocado typically takes. They're not like some of the fruit trees you can get fruit. You may not, maybe you shouldn't get it the second year, maybe you should be picking it off, but they will produce fruit in the second year. I think avocados take a number of years longer. But we could Google that and find
I'd
out.
also, I'm sorry, Mike.
No, go ahead.
I was going to suggest looking at the California Rare Fruit Growers website. They have a lot of information about avocados. And if I don't recall reading anything about little avocados, but perhaps they've updated it since I last looked at it. And they might have more information about, maybe the dwarf varieties have a different production schedule, or just generally about when they first fruit from that. I do think it does take some time,
Yeah.
but I don't recall what the range is.
Okay. Okay, we need to move on. We are way behind. My fault for talking too
Okay.
much. Okay, so and let's do this fairly quickly, because not everybody's going to want. But planting a fruit tree, most of the fruit trees you're going to plant them dormant and bare root. Citrus you're going to buy in a pot and plant them later. But the prime time to plant a bare root fruit tree is January. And digging the hole, give it a good start. So you don't want to dig it too deep because the tree will tend to sink. You want to dig it just as deep as the roots are, but you want to dig it wider. And no, don't add fertilizers or amendments, because it'll think it's too much of a good thing and just hang around in there and not put its roots out where it should. So if you can plant it so it ends up just a little higher than the surrounding soil, that's good, because it's probably going to sink a little bit anyhow. You want the shape, see that sort of bowl shape. That's the way you want the hole to be. If you can, that'll force more of the roots to come up near the surface, which actually is a good thing. There's more oxygen there, and the tree's just going to get a better start. Planting on a hill, we don't have many in Davis, but somewhere in Yolo County, there's probably a hill. You want to make sure you have a flat spot. Um, then you would certainly water the tree in very well. You're going to need to water it much more frequently. And then we come to what is now a controversial thing. Do you head it or not? The advice when I did master gardening training back in 2011 was you head them all. In other words, you cut the tree off. I know you bought a tree that's 5 feet high and you're going to cut it off so it's 2 feet high. It's kind of hard to do, but what that does is it forces the tree to put out branches at a lower level, and it's just going to be easier to control the size. And especially if it's a tree, which Bonnie talks about, that you prune into a bowl shape, it makes it a lot easier. On the other hand, there is some thought that letting that tree live for a year or two without cutting it off makes you're leaving branches on that tree put energy into growing, and they're actually going to do better. And then you just have to prune them more heavily to begin with. So, there's some real controversy out there among fruit tree growers, and certainly in the academic area. And but if you want to keep it small, easier, probably you want to head it. Okay. Um, let's okay, fertility, fertilizing, basically, uh, I think in our area, you probably are going to want to add nitrogen to the soil. You may not need to add anything else. So if you're going to use a prepared fertilizer, you would want to pick one that is higher in nitrogen proportionate to phosphorus and potassium. You know the numbers on the bag. So the first number is nitrogen. So like 511 is much higher in nitrogen. And so you're probably gonna have to add nitrogen. But Bonnie, you don't fertilize very much, do you?
No, no, I don't. Not for my stone fruits. The citrus, I give nitrogen.
Okay, all
Yeah,
right. So do you put compost down? Do you do
I
anything?
do. I do
Okay,
try to put compost down and I mulch and
yeah,
yeah,
okay.
and I
So if
have it
you
clear of weeds. Yeah.
Yeah. So a few inches of compost are going to be adding, I mean, that's not technically fertilizing, but it is going to be adding nutrients to the soil as that compost breaks down. Um, the common recommendation I've seen in this area is definitely to think about fertilizing with nitrogen. But some of it depends on, do you want your tree to grow a lot faster? You probably don't, frankly. They grow too fast as it is. So kind of get a feel for your area. Your soil may not be as fertile as Bonnie's, so there's some location factors to consider. Okay. Um,
Or
yeah. So again,
back.
yeah. Um, you're basically, if you're buying a fertilizer, you go by the directions on the back, pretty much as how much. But again, a fertilizer that's higher than in nitrogen than the other nutrients makes the most sense here. You can do it with just nitrogen, like ammonia sulfate is a common nitrogen fertilizer. Um, you could use fish fertilizer. That's usually 511 if you want to, use it that way, or one of the others. Lawn fertilizer is often a good choice here because it's higher in nitrogen than phosphorus and potassium. Okay. So water, are they going to need irrigation? Pretty much yes. If you want the tree to grow well and to have as much production as possible. Now there are trees, I mean, there are almond trees growing out on the Pewter Creek uh, trail on campus that obviously don't get watered. You can see almond trees growing wild pretty much all over the valley. Almonds are a prunus, so they're closer to an apricot than they are to a walnut. So they're pretty, almonds are an example of a fruit tree, if you will, that can make it with no irrigation. And I think a lot of them, probably fig trees. You see fig trees growing wild in the valley. So they're going to do a lot better with irrigation. But for the most part, we're going to recommend that you give your tree um, a proper amount of irrigation. And commercial growers put a surprising amount of water on their trees. So next. Okay, so drip systems, as with pretty much all other irrigation, a drip system has a lot of advantages. Probably the easiest, uses least water. And in our relatively heavy clay soils, the water that's dripped is going to spread out pretty well. So drip systems are recommended, but you could use other options. You can use sprinklers. You don't want to hit the tree because then you can cause disease at the a number of diseases can be caused if the trunk of the tree is getting wet, but you could use sprinklers or soaker hoses or a hose, as long as you know how much water you're putting on. Okay. This is just an idea of how you'd set up a drip system around the tree. You want to make sure though when you're watering that you go out that the majority of the water should be out at the edge of the tree. That's the drip line, at least, because that's normally, if you think about it, where rain is going to mostly end up falling. It's going to, kind of make its way out to the edge of the tree. So that's where trees are designed to have most of their roots. But these trees also are going to put roots out generally at least as far as twice the radius of the tree. So if you have a tree that with a radius that's 6 feet, that tree's roots are going to be out 12 feet, and probably don't have to put water out that far, but you sure want to put water out maybe half that distance if you can. You can read this. This is for commercial fruit trees, the amount of water gallons of water that they recommend applying per day. So let's say if you look at a 4-year-old tree and they said would have about 100 square feet of coverage. And that's the big thing. How big is the canopy? Um, if um, if you have a hot day in midsummer with no fog, the recommendation there is 15 gallons a day. Now, is the tree going to survive with less than that? Yes. Is it going to produce some fruit with somewhat less than that? Yes. But is it going to thrive and produce as much as, say, a commercial orchardist would want? Probably not. So I think it's a surprising amount of water. Um, and if you look on a very hot day in, August, say for a full-size fruit tree, they're recommending 56 gallons a day. Now, most of us are not going to get up to that, but that just gives you an idea of how much water. Now, notice that it varies pretty significantly based on how warm the day is. So you don't need to do that in spring. But you do need to calculate how much water you're putting on. And if your tree looks droopy, isn't growing well, any number of other things, it could be that you have to give them more water. Now, you don't want to do that 15 gallons a day. You want to collect that and give it, once the tree matures, you want to water them once a week. Maybe in a really hot, windy period, you may want to water them twice. But once a week or even every other week for like jujubes would be just fine with, probably once every 3 weeks. So it depends a little on the variety or the species, but you do need to think about how much water they're getting and it's best practice to not just guess. So if you have a drip system, you can do it pretty easily. You count the drippers, and they're 1 gallon drippers, and you got 50 of them, and you run them for an hour. Well, you've probably given the tree 50 gallons. Um, if if you have a sprinkler, you would want to run that sprinkler for a while into a flat dish to calculate how much water they're getting. And that's going to give you inches. And what it comes down to is if you were trying to water 12 square 12 square feet, or for every 12 square feet, an inch of water is 7.5 gallons. So, you can kind of do the math from there, figure out how many 12 square foot sections you're trying to water around your tree, depending on how high it is. And if you want to give it an inch of water, you just multiply that times 7.5. And that's how many gallons of water you would want to put on the tree. Okay, questions? Any?
My kumquat bush has stopped growing and never had fruit. What are the requirements for growing kumquats?
Well, that's a citrus, and they need generally more water. They need more regular water, and we're going to talk about citrus than most of the stone fruits, or certainly apples. It could be any number of things. Did the tree have kumquats at one point and then stop? That's what it says.
Never had.
Hmm. Um, I don't know. Uh, now you've probably looked, but take a look and make sure. Now, all citrus, well, yeah, virtually all citrus that you buy have been grafted, and they have a pretty bad habit of sending up branches, if you will, from the rootstock. And that rootstock probably wouldn't be kumquat at all. And so if somehow the top part of your tree, had died, and all you've really got left is rootstock, that's maybe a bizarre reason, but I've seen it happen. I've seen a lot of people growing, essentially they're growing rootstock and they didn't realize it. So you might want to check and make sure that you've got tree that's above that graft that's pretty obvious. Other than that, I don't know. I don't know. Bonnie, do you have any ideas?
Uh,
They don't usually need to be fertilized.
yeah, so I actually have to say I have the same problem. I have a
Oh,
kumquat that hasn't,
Me
that's
too.
bigger and isn't fruiting.
Right.
It's making small little flowers
Yep.
and then they turn brown and fall off.
Yes.
And I don't know if it's the environmental, um, the wind and heat that fries them sometimes, or I mean, make sure it's getting enough sunlight, make sure other things haven't overgrown so that it's all in the shade now. Um, Maybe make sure that it's getting some nitrogen in January, February, and again maybe in May after um, yeah, and just enough water. I don't know. I've been meaning to go down to talk to yeah, I can't. I've tried a lot of different things and I'm not sure why. So I'm glad you asked that, and that'll motivate me to go down and talk to Don Shore and see if he has any other ideas because I've looked it up and I can't figure out why it's doing that. Usually it's environmental. If something will flower and not fruit, it's it doesn't have pollinizers, or the environment is making it so that the pollinizers aren't able to get there. Wind, heat, rain, those kinds of things.
I have a yuzu, yuzu, that I grew from seed. It bears heavily every year, but should I clear off the fruit each season to help it grow, to help it? It grows very well.
Oh, that's so nice. Do you want to do
I
that, Mike? Or
no, go ahead because I'm not
yeah,
familiar
well,
with
I'm not. I haven't grown a yuzu, but I'm. Yeah. It's a good idea to clear the fruit off just to give the plant a rest. Um, and if you're wanting, new fruit the next season, the same thing with like tangerines that hang on all year. You
Yeah.
just want to clear stuff off, if you can. Sometimes it's really high up and you can't, but usually through the winter, stuff kind of eventually falls off. But I think just generally it's a good idea to take the fruit off and then clear it so it's not rotting or allowing any bacteria or something to grow
right.
out of the tree.
Can
So
be
you
a
can clear
source
off
of
all your dead
disease.
fruit so you
Yeah.
don't have insects and stuff.
My olive tree is shedding terribly. Does it need more water or am I watering it too much?
Shedding.
Getting.
Yeah. Just dropping all the leaves all the time, I guess. Yeah, it probably is either too much or too little water. Have you tried, Mike, do you want to talk, discuss that?
Well, olive trees don't, they're another tree that, evolved in Mediterranean climates. They don't need much water. I mean, they're not deciduous, but they're going to drop leaves all the time. I mean, non-deciduous trees change their leaves, so they are going to drop leaves. I don't know if it means any particular amount of time, um, or any particular period of time that they're doing that. Um, but yeah,
Is
if
it
you're giving it
balding?
too much water, one olive trees can be susceptible to root rot, which probably would lead to that kind of a problem, and eventually the tree dying. But yeah, I don't know. Um, I see there are a lot of questions, and we probably need to. What slide are we on, Bonnie? I can't.
Oh, more water. Oh, a lot of water. And then
Yeah.
just resources. And then that's the end.
Okay. All right. So we're pretty much
Here, I'll
done,
leave it on
right?
this.
I sort of talked about how to calculate the amount of water. Again, a drip system is easiest. There are a number of publications online, if you look at this, just ACNR catalog and Google that and fruit trees, you'll come up with a lot of publications. Some are free, some you have to pay for. And their publications are excellent. So, the fruit tree publications, I mean, I still look at mine all the time. Just kind of nice to have a book once in a while. Um, there's a lot of information out there. Back up a little bit, Bonnie. Let's make sure I didn't. Yeah, The Home Orchard is an excellent book. And then there's some that focus on pests. There's a fruit tree pest book. Is that the one that's there?
Mhm.
Yeah, Pests of the Garden and Small Farm. I think there may be even other fruit tree pest books that are available. And then, of course, there's a lot of websites that you can search for. We certainly would encourage you to start with University of California websites. I mean, you can trust those. We all know there is a tremendous amount of information and misinformation out on the web. So, but if you start with the University of California, certainly, and UC Davis because they're in our area, or other, research universities, you're probably going to be getting you are going to be getting information you can, trust. Can't say that for everything else on the web, but go back up one more, would you?
Um,
Okay, well, I sort of talked about this, is how do you calculate? I mean, again, the easiest way is to realize that an inch of water over 12 square feet, 7.5 gallons. So if you're watering by hose, um, you run it into a 5 gallon bucket and see how long that takes so you know how much water you're putting on. If you're watering with a sprinkler, you do it into some sort of a flat dish so you can calculate it. And then just pay attention, look up some sort of a graph scale as to how much water a tree of your size needs, and go from there. And again, if you want to be more careful with water, you can. There's probably some bit of a result to that. You may get less production, and for certainly on if we get really hot weather, and it's windy for a period of time, your trees are going to need some water. So let's take a look at some of the other questions.
yeah.
I copied and pasted them into a document, and they're mostly citrus questions, so you can wait for the
Okay.
citrus section, or I'm happy to read them off now.
Maybe read them if the people can't come next week.
If you don't,
Yeah.
okay, if you don't mind answering a question about citrus, I bought a dwarf lime that is root bound. It isn't showing fruit yet, but is healthy, so I'd like to repot it into a bigger pot right away. This isn't necessarily the right time, but I'm thinking it's the lesser of two evils. Any thoughts?
Well, I guess it depends on how much it's suffering. I mean, you think it's root bound because it's in a small pot. Um, you can probably protect it. I mean, normally you would do that in the spring, in the late spring. That's the better time to do it. Um, I mean, they don't go dormant, but they certainly slow down through the winter. But you don't usually want to disturb them until the cold weather is past. So I don't know. That it just depends on if you think the tree's going to die in the interim, then yes, just very, very carefully pull it out, spread the roots a little bit because if it's really root bound and they're all kind of bound up on each other, they're going to stay there. So very gently, you want to pull at least a few of the major roots out so they're going out in the right direction, and then yes, put it in a bigger pot. I usually think for fruit tree, for citrus, and lime is a good choice because especially a small, if it said it was a dwarf or a small, I mean, limes stay pretty small. Um, Citrus does really well in pots, but I mean, I think 25 gallons is probably the size that you want to ultimately move them up to. Um, yeah,
I just want to suggest also, since it's in a pot and you're transplanting it, so summer is our toughest season.
yeah.
And we know that it needs sun, but maybe avoid it having it in the afternoon sun. Just because you've just transplanted it, you want to baby it a little bit. So let it have morning sun and then make sure it's in the shade in the afternoon.
Good point.
The next is a comment. My kumquat bears all the time. It didn't like too much sun or wind, and I did have to move it, but I give it horse manure and it is very fruitful.
Well, there you go, Bonnie.
Okay, thank you.
Someone someone asked what is the source of the kumquat tree? And here's another question. I have a yuzu that I grew from seed. It bears, oh, I'm sorry, I read this one already. Um, I have two kumquat trees, one in a pot and the other in the ground. They both fruit well in Davis. Mine is also West Davis and in a pot. And this is the last question. What is the best way to successfully grow lemons? We have tried two in a pot, trying to fertilize as necessary, but the leaves fall off, leaving few, but never any lemons.
In pots.
I
So,
think, oh, go ahead, Mike.
well, I was going to say the first thing to think about in a pot is that it may not be getting enough water or enough frequent water because, and especially the type of pot. If it's a metal pot, it's going to warm up quite a lot. If it's a small pot, so that's the first thing I would think about is that if the tree is in a pot, it is probably going to need more frequent water. And that would go, some people will put a dwarf peach in a pot, and they're going to need water more frequently than a peach in the ground. So that's the first thing I would think about. And then, did the leaves turn yellow and fall off? That could be a nitrogen problem. Um, it's a number of things. So first thing I would think of is water. But Bonnie,
Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. Anything with a citrus in a pot, um, the kumquat that I have that doesn't bear, it was in a pot for a while also. And the pots just heat up. If it's terracotta, whatever it is, doesn't matter how big it is, they heat up and you just need so much water. I mean, they won't water anyway. Citrus have very shallow roots, so the soil at the top up there is going to dry out more quickly anyway. It just they need a lot of wherever you've got it. You just got to make sure it gets a lot of water, maybe mulch really well on top in the pot. And also
yeah,
plants, the citrus and pots do need more fertilizer more frequently than in the ground. So whatever fertilizer recommendation you're looking at, make sure it's for pots. And usually it's like monthly recommended.
yeah. But if you do mulch them, make sure that the mulch is still pulled away from the bark or from the trunk.
Yeah, not right up to the trunk.
Yeah, not right up to the trunk. And Bonnie's idea of giving it some afternoon shade maybe would make sense too in a pot. I mean, if they're getting maybe 8 hours of sun, they may do better to not be in direct sun if they're in a pot. I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
Although I have, what do I have? I have 5 citrus that are in pots just because I wanted to try it. And they're in like half poly barrels, so 25 gallons, which is a cheap alternative, and it's plastic, I know, but it's not in the landfill. And they're, well, they get some afternoon shade, but and I do water them more frequently, but they're all kind of they're doing okay. So
It's all about microclimates. Everyone's
yeah,
different,
yeah, it
and
really
it could just
does.
be,
Yeah,
yeah.
it really does matter. Um, and they're not going to get as big, obviously. You don't want them to get as big. They're a lot smaller, and I do give them more frequent water and more fertilizer than my citrus that are in the ground. Um, so yeah, you just have to kind of adapt.
I'm sorry. Sorry about your lemon.
Well, I don't know if we kind of got off on a tangent there. I don't know if we really answered the question, although I think the first thing would be water. Yeah.
That's it.
Okay. Well, we have exceeded 4 o'clock, so thank you for coming, everybody. And again, in 2 weeks, Bonnie is going to talk